I'm Anthony Denice, as I have been introduced, senior biology student, Rhode Island native. And, yeah, Rhode Island native. And I'm going to be talking about something completely different from all of the other speakers. I'm sorry about that. But it's going to be about big cat conservation and some of the issues involved with keeping big cats in captivity. Now, I'm sure some of you have seen lions or tigers at the local zoo, leopards, cheetahs, pumas. We group all these animals as big cats. But what you probably don't know is that there's actually a huge population of these animals being kept in private ownership. Rather than being in accredited zoos, these animals are being kept in roadside attractions, circuses, even as family pets. So I'm going to share some of my experiences that I have had with these animals, but one in particular, one that is a much more captivating individual than myself, and this is Preciosa. And Preciosa is Spanish. It means precious, and as you can see, she's a total diva, very photogenic. And Preciosa is a 160-pound adult female jaguar. But what makes her remarkable is that she is a former family pet. This jaguar was living in a city with people, walking around on a leash, and eventually she ended up at this place where I had the opportunity to do some work called Centro de Rescate Taricaya, or Taricaya Rescue Center, which is in the southeast corner of Peru. So here's Preciosa when she was a cub. She was probably the size of a small dog. And she was 6 months after being confiscated by the Peruvian government from her owners. She arrived at Centro de Rescate Taricaya, which I'll just call Taricaya, shorten it. She arrived at Taricaya in 2005. And within a couple months, she was already ripping apart livestock that had been so nicely donated by the local farmers, poor goats and sheep. And she was completely unable to be handled. It was, even at the age of under a year, she was already too strong, too unpredictable. Nobody could enter the enclosure with her. It's a really tough situation to manage this sort of animal in captivity. So you can imagine what would have happened had Preciosa remained a family pet for even a couple more months. It would have been a disaster. So, yes. So you're probably asking, how did this kid from Rhode Island end up in the Amazon rainforest? And it all comes back to my university, Northeastern University. We have what we call a co-op program. And the co-op just means that you spend a couple semesters outside of the classroom. Instead, you're out in the field doing internships, working actual full-time jobs, some of which pay money, or I've heard rumors that some of them pay money. And it connects back to your coursework. So as a biology student, most of my peers did stuff in laboratories or hospitals. And for me, I don't know, the lab coat and the bench work wasn't really my thing. So I donned a pair of rubber boots, some ripped khakis, an old t-shirt, and I ended up in the Peruvian Amazon working with wildlife. And I couldn't help but notice that Preciosa, more than any of the other animals at the rescue center, was bored. Okay? So despite the constant flux of people walking by and such, Preciosa was showing some kind of weird tendencies. She was showing some weird signs of being stressed. Because animals like this, as you will see, become stressed when they're not using their natural behaviors. So I started talking to the staff about some of the issues surrounding this, and we decided to develop a project that would change her behavioral set and change the way that she interacts with her environment to make sure that she stays healthy and happy. But I think it's important to note that this is not a focused issue. This is not just preciosa. And it's not just in the rainforest. It's not just in southeastern Peru. In the United States, according to the Humane Society's conservative estimates, there are between 5,000 and 7,000 big cats in captivity. 5,000 and 7,000. And that's a pretty disturbing figure when you remember that most of these cats are threatened in the wild. Tigers are highly endangered. Jaguars, according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, are listed as near threatened, meaning that if their habitat is continued to be destroyed at the rate that it is, and they're hunted by ranchers and people looking to exploit them, if that continues, they will be threatened. They will be endangered. So these are animals that, their habitat's vanishing, they're vanishing from the wild, but they actually have a pretty sizable population as pets in tourist attractions and in zoos in the United States. So you say 5,000 and 7,000, that's a lot of zoo animals. But only 400 of those are in accredited AZA zoos, Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Only 400 of those, let's say it's 5,000, that means 92% are in unaccredited institutions. Some of these may be sanctuaries like Tarakaya that do amazing work for the animals and for the environment, but I guarantee you that most of them are not, that many of them are families who have a big cat as a pet. Roadside tourist attractions, wildlife parks that exploit the cats for money, circuses. So this is the issue that we're dealing with in the United States. And we've created a time bomb that has actually already went off many times, and we've ignored it. These cats are illegal to have in private ownership in 19 states. Okay? There was a law passed in 2003 saying that they cannot cross state boundaries unless you're an exempt institution, which in most cases means an AZA-accredited zoo. But 31 states at the moment still allow you to keep a tiger as a pet. Does this animal look like a family pet to you? I'm a libertarian. I'm all for free markets. You can do what you want with your property. But this is ridiculous. Okay? These animals should not be in contact with people. And this is evidenced by the 300 reported incidents where a big cat has injured somebody in the United States since 1990. In that time span, in the United States, 300 incidents. 21 people have died. 21 people have been killed by these animals because they're predators. They bring down large herbivores in the savannas, in the jungles, and the forests. They are not meant to be in cages. And this fact that they are not meant to be in cages is reflected in their behavior. This is what Jaguar Territory should look like. Okay? You've got water, you've got cover, and you've got no people. Okay? The recommended area necessary for a wild jaguar is a minimum of 25 square kilometers, or about 10 square miles. Okay? Preciosa's enclosure is 10 meters by 10 meters, which it's actually quite big if you're standing inside of it. But it's just not a jungle. It doesn't allow the proper space. And it's the best that can be offered under her circumstances where she can't be released. Space and money are constraints. But it's not a rainforest. It is 0.0004% of the recommended range for a female jaguar. Okay? So this is the behavior that is shown by big cats when they are stressed out in captivity. It's called pacing. People in the field call it pacing. And what it is it's a completely repetitive, useless behavior that is caused by the frustrations of confinement. These animals, their biology is telling them, I need to go out, I need to mark my territory, I need to hunt, I need to find mates, but instead, where there should be an open rainforest in front of them, they have a fence. Okay? And it's a sad truth. And this behavior, I bet if you go to any zoo, you'll see at least one animal performing this behavior. And it's a useless behavior. It's caused by a psychological condition. It's caused by stress and frustration. So what we decided to do was a renovation of her exhibit to see if permanent changes that we made to her environment could cause a permanent change in her behavior. So, in a rainforest where we're limited by space and money and time, we do need to find a place for a 160-pound Jaguar during this renovation period. We decided rather than build out, we would build up. We added a second layer that would mimic, in a way, the rainforest understory, okay, out of bridges, platforms, a nice network for her. And what it did was it added another network, another way for her to get around her exhibit, and it increased the usable area. So we harvested some young trees, which doesn't hurt the rainforest, by the way. They grow back in months. We use all materials that we could gather or buy locally. Chainsaws, nails, ropes, machetes, simple tools to keep costs at a minimum and to work fast. And this is what it looked like before. As you can see, it's kind of barren. She has some toys, but for the most part, it's not that much usable stuff. But without adding any space to the environment, we turned it into something more jungle-like, something that gave her cover, something that gave her dynamic structures that moved, that she could move around. New scratching posts. We put new scents in. We fixed the water course to make sure that she had the water that all literature says jaguars need. 2 new platforms, 4 bridges, one of which is moved. And we could tell right away that we loved it. But we had no idea if Preciosa loved it. We had no idea if this worked. So what did we do? Pick up the clipboard, pick up the stopwatch, more observations. And what we found was almost no pacing. So she had went from spending 45% of her daytime hours pacing to almost none of her time pacing. Maybe a couple seconds here, a couple seconds there. But then she'd say, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to explore that. Pacing behavior turned off. And as you can see, she now had all these different things that she could do, as I have nicely acted out. This is essentially what the environment needs to do. It needs to challenge her and make her think of ways to find food. It needs to be dynamic and be able to move. It needs to have places that she can mark to make her own territory. And it has to have nice places for her to rest. Because as you all have, I'm sure many of you have cats. Cats need their rest. Yeah. But renovation wasn't the only part of this procedure. There was also another component that was training and enrichment. And this is a long-term thing. This is something that has to go on throughout her life. So Tarakai hired a behaviorist. They hired Sandy Kramer. She acted as my mentor for the time period that I was there. I actually went back again. After the renovation project, a year later, I ended up going back to work on more advanced husbandry techniques, more advanced animal care. And Sandy acted as my mentor, so I learned the finer details of a process called operant conditioning. And operant conditioning simply means that we set up a system of positive reinforcement, a system of training where we ask her to do something, and if she does it right, she gets a nice, tasty piece of meat. So as you can see here, she'll be asked to follow the target with her nose, and then if she holds still in that position long enough for us to poke her with a needle, she gets a piece of meat. And you're asking why the needle, why the holding still? Because this process is also going to extend her life in captivity by making veterinary care easier. This simulates an intramuscular injection. And we've also trained her to receive oral vitamins, medicines in that manner. I've trained her to give a high five. It's really cool. I'm really proud of that, actually. So I got to help out with this training aspect. And then there's the enrichment aspect. And as you can see, here's Preciosa hanging from a sack of meat. And here's her grabbing a whole chicken that we hid underneath something tied up, and she just ripped the rope in half. So enrichment, what is enrichment? Enrichment, in the animal care sense, is adding some sort of new stimulus to the environment that interests the animal and causes the animal to display their natural behaviors, to use those natural abilities. Okay? So that could be making some sort of complexity to their food distribution. In this case, we gave her the meat. Rather than just throw the meat in, make her use her hunting behaviors. We rub scents everywhere. The only reason I brought cologne to the jungle was to spray in the cats' cages, okay? Because it's not like anybody cares about how you smell down there. But Preciosa does. Preciosa actually loves the smell of Hugo Boss cologne. And we found this out by spraying it throughout her exhibit and seeing if she displayed a special preference to those areas when she was marking and rubbing her scent. So that's the cool thing about enrichment. I've seen seals push around blocks of ice that have squid frozen inside. I've seen raccoons try to extract cereal from a tissue box, even though you've stuck it together with peanut butter. It's kind of a torture. But I've seen dogs listen to classical music, and pretty intently, too. So that's the cool thing about enrichment, is there's no protocol. There's no written method that works in every case. It's all trial and error. But it's such a huge part of keeping these animals healthy and happy in captivity. It requires you to leave the protocols, put down the sheets telling you what to do, and use your creativity and start thinking like an animal. So for me, it's very rewarding, because I can see animals like Preciosa doing what they're meant to do, displaying their hunting behaviors, their marking behaviors, roaring, stuff like that. You can all induce that with enrichment.